got an amazingly large supervision team and incredible strengths in terms of the people that are on the panel, including John Hattie, who's one of the most well-known education researchers in the world. So there's nothing to be nervous about. Take it away.
Hello everyone, I'm Charlotte and I'm here to present my confirmation of candidature on my thesis of student evaluation of educational quality in secondary schools. I'd like to thank my supervisors Herb, John Marshall, Teresa, Jesse and Matthew for guiding me through the PhD process thus far. I really appreciate all the support and feedback you've given me up to this point, and I hope the next 2 years are going to be just as much fun. Do I have a clicker? That one? Cool. So we all know that teachers are a vital part of students' education. They provide students with knowledge and subject-related skills and motivate them to work hard and put in lots of effort. Second to students only, teachers are the most important predictor in student outcomes. So it's very important to increase teachers' effectiveness. But how do we increase teachers' effectiveness? You need a proper measurement to measure teachers' effectiveness. So in the past, researchers mainly used value-added models. These were models that focused on the extent to which teachers contributed to student achievement over the course of a school year. But we all know that student performance is not the only marker for student success and their happiness, and research suggests that these value-added models are not reliable nor valid. On top of that, they don't give us any information on how or why the students perform the way they do, nor how to improve their performance. So secondary school teachers need an instrument that gives them diagnostic feedback on how to improve their effectiveness. Using students' perception of their teaching effectiveness is a useful tool in determining this. In tertiary education, it's been a long-running tradition to use students' evaluation of teaching to do so. We've all filled in the surveys at the end of the class where you're asked what you thought of your teacher or your course, and that's basically what it is. The most widely researched student evaluation of teaching in tertiary education is the Student's Evaluation of Educational Quality Questionnaire, henceforth referred to as the SEEQ. Developed by our own Professor Herb Marshall in the 1980s, the SEEQ covered 9 dimensions of teaching effectiveness. It's been proven to be a valid and robust measurement, being proven to be valid in multiple countries on several subjects and within multiple university departments. So, being quite pleased with the results of the SEEQ up to this point, Herb, Teresa and Matthew have spent the last few years developing the SEEQ for use in secondary school, dubbing it the SEEQ-S with the S standing for school. They've added 6 new dimensions relevant to secondary school, such as classroom management, something that's not relevant in tertiary education in large lecture halls, and technology, something that wasn't relevant in the 1980s but most certainly is now. An example of a SEEQ-S question would be students being asked whether they have learned anything that they've considered valuable and being asked to respond on it on a scale from 1 to 9 in terms of agreement. The teacher version of the SEEQ is exactly the same, except for that the phrasing is changed from you to students. So to measure the validity of the SEEQ, I'll be using 4 different methods. We'll be conducting the SEEQ with 1 students, 2 teachers, and 2 external validation criteria. A survey measuring course-specific student growth, and a survey measuring teachers' adherence to professional standards of teaching. All these surveys will be conducted with students from year 7 to year 12 in schools all over Australia. Thus far, there's been a pilot study. The SEEQ-S has been conducted in 2018 and 2019 with over 4,000 students that are part of more than 200 classes and being taught by more than 90 teachers. The 2 external validation criteria have not been tested so far because they're newly developed but we do aim for all 4 surveys to be conducted in the future data collections. So I'll be doing 4 studies to test the validity of the SEEQ. My first study will be looking at the factor structure of the SEEQ. To look at the factor structure of the SEEQ, I'll be doing a multi-level factor analysis. The factor analysis will gain me information on the variability among all the SEEQ variables and look for joint variations, so items that match with each other, to find underlying latent variables, in our case known as the SEEQ dimensions. In our case, the SEEQ has theoretical underpinnings. These theoretical underpinnings will be displayed in a factor model that you can see on the right over here, with all the items listed and linked to dimensions. So, in order to find out whether a factor structure has a good model fit, or it's a sound structure, we'll be looking at whether all the items load appropriately with the latent variables that they have been mapped to. And the structure will be good if, for example, item 1 loads properly onto learning and item 3 does not load very high onto learning. An important part of the SEEQ is that we're working with a school-related data set. School-related data sets are inherently multiple levels. They have multiple levels. They have students that are in classes that are taught by different teachers. So that makes it a little complicated. So what's very important in working with multi-level data sets is that you pick the correct unit of analysis, which is the subject of your statistical analysis. It's important because conclusions drawn from your analysis can only be reliable and valid at your chosen level. I will be choosing the class averages as my unit of analysis, so I can look at the differences between classes, but my factor analysis will take both levels into account. So we can draw more in-depth conclusions and also look at the differences between levels. The research aims of my first study is to 1. Confirm the a priori factor structure as established by Herb, Teresa and Matthew in the pilot study, and to replicate the findings of this factor structure with the student version with the teacher version of the SEEQ, and to test the reliability of my survey. I hypothesized that for both student and teacher ratings, the results will show support for the factor structure, and the reliability of my SEEQ as survey will be high. So after establishing that the SEEQ has a sound factor structure, I'll delve into it a little bit deeper with my second study by looking at the construct validity and student-teacher agreement. By looking at the construct validity, we'll be asking ourselves the question, does the SEEQ actually measure what it is supposed to measure? In order to do so, I'll be looking at convergent validity and discriminant validity. After establishing the construct validity for both the separate student and teacher version, I'll be looking at what I think is the most interesting part of my PhD project, whether students and teachers actually agree with each other, otherwise known as giving similar ratings on their surveys. So I previously mentioned that looking at student perceptions of their teaching, of a teacher's effectiveness, is a very useful tool. But what's even more useful is to compare what students think of their teachers and what teachers think of themselves. Because what's the point if a student thinks that the teacher's doing terribly and the teacher thinks they're doing fantastic, or the other way around? If there is no agreement between students and teachers on what needs to happen in a lesson, that kind of blocks the progress from happening in the classroom. So to measure student and teacher agreement, I'll be doing a multi-trait, multi-method analysis. As the name suggests, this analysis consists of 2 parts. I'll be measuring multiple traits using multiple methods. In the case of my second study, the multiple methods are the student version of the SEEQ and the teacher version of the SEEQ, and the multiple traits are the 15 dimensions that we'll be measuring. So, the results of a multi-trait, multi-method analysis is usually shown in a matrix. This matrix consists of different correlations of different scale scores. So what we'll be looking at is whether students and teachers correlate highly with each other if they're measuring the same dimensions, as can be seen in the green cells, and measure low with each other if they're measuring the different ones, which is all the other ones, including the pink ones. We'll hopefully find that the green cells are high, which just indicates that there's high student-teacher agreement, and that's what we're hoping for. So the research aims of the second study is to expand on the factor structure by looking at the construct validity of the SEEQ and to establish the extent of student-teacher agreement using the multi-trait, multi-method analysis. I hypothesize that for both student and teacher ratings, convergent and discriminant validity will be found for matching and non-matching dimensions respectively, and that the multi-trait, multi-method analysis will support high student-teacher agreement. So for the third and the fourth study, our research team has developed our own questionnaires, which is fantastic. So for the third study, our research team has developed a survey that looks at course-specific student growth. The course-specific student growth questionnaire consists of 12 statements covering 5 different dimensions of course-specific growth, including overall growth category that's not shown here. An example of a question would be, students are being asked, because of this particular teacher, I worked harder than usual, and they'll have to either disagree or agree on a 5-point scale. So all the categories of course-specific student growth have been mapped to our 15 dimensions of SEEQ, as can be seen over here. So the research aims for the third study are to look at the relationship between course-specific student growth and both student and teacher ratings. We hypothesize that for both student and teacher ratings, they will be positively correlated with both general and specific course-specific student growth. More specifically, I hypothesize that all the different categories of student growth will be predicted by the SEEQ dimensions that they have been mapped. For the fourth study, our research team has developed a questionnaire that looks at the professional standards for teaching. So the professional standards for teaching have been developed by the Australian Institute for Learning and School Leadership, and all graduate teachers must adhere to this. So the New South Wales accreditation system has made this a requirement for all graduate teachers. And while this has been based on years of research, there hasn't been a lot of research that links these standards to student ratings of student evaluations. So we've created a survey that measures the teachers' adherence to it by asking teachers to answer the question, my current teaching is a lot below, on par, or above this standard for every one of these standards. So we have mapped them to the SEEQ dimensions as well, but we have mapped all our dimensions to the first 5 standards because they are the classroom-related standards. And standards 6 and 7, engage in professional learning and engage professionally with colleagues, parents, and community, are inherently being fulfilled by participating in our PhD project. Both study 3 and 4 will be analyzed using multi-trait, multi-method analysis and correlational analysis to look at the relationship between the SEEQ ratings and the standards benchmark questionnaire. I hypothesize that both higher student and teacher self-ratings will be positively correlated with higher results on the standards benchmark questionnaire. More specifically, I hypothesize that each standard will be predicted by the SEEQ dimensions that they have been mapped with. So the timeline in which I'm planning on conducting these studies is already underway. So we already have some data for study 1 and study 2, but we're continuing to collect more data on it. And for study 3 and 4, we're currently piloting that in term 4 of 2020, and we're planning on continuing that throughout 2021. I do have to say that the mapping of the SEEQ dimensions with both the newly developed course-specific student growth questionnaire and the benchmark for professional standards questionnaire is subjective and is part of the validation of both questionnaires, or all three of them. So in summary, I'll be validating the SEEQ-S in 4 different ways. I'll be looking at the factor structure, I'll be looking at the construct validity, the student-teacher agreement, and I'll be looking at 2 external validation criteria, the course-specific student growth questionnaire and the benchmarks for professional standards. I've also included a table that shows you the mapping of all the different dimensions within all the different surveys. If anyone's interested or wants or has any questions about that, so we can go back to that if anyone has questions afterwards. That was this is a take-home message, and that was my presentation. So thank you very much for coming to listen to my presentation, and I hope you enjoyed it. And now it's time for questions.